The dust of the frontier clung to everything: the barns, the wooden fences, even the thin dresses women wore as they worked in the sun. For the Johnson family, times had been growing harsher with every passing season. The crops had failed 2 years in a row. The debts had piled up at the mercantile, and hunger had begun to gnaw at their bellies. Their farm was falling apart, and with every hoofbeat of creditors' horses, the threat of losing everything pressed harder against them. In that desperation, they began whispering about choices. No loving parent should make but choices poverty had cornered them into considering. Martha Johnson, only 17, with bright eyes full of dreams and fingers that had never stopped sewing scraps into dresses for her younger siblings, became the center of their cruel calculation. Her father spoke the words one evening at the dinner table, his voice gravelly and final. "Old man Hargrove offered us a milk cow for your hand in marriage, Martha. It'll keep us alive through winter. You'll do this for your family." Martha froze, the cornbread in her hand suddenly tasteless, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hargrove was nearly 60, his back bent and his face carved deep with years of loneliness. He had land but no warmth, and every girl in town avoided even looking his way. To Martha, the thought was suffocating, like chains around her youth. But when she looked at her siblings' thin faces, their hungry eyes, she knew her protest would not matter. She whispered, "Yes, Pa," though tears blurred her sight, and the decision was sealed. The morning of the wedding, the town gathered as though for a spectacle, for gossip travels quicker than wildfire. The church steps felt like gallows under Martha's feet, her dress plain, her veil heavy with sorrow. Hargrove waited at the altar, his hands trembling, not with joy but with the stiffness of age. Beside him stood a cow tied to a rope as if it were some grotesque dowry. Martha's mother turned away, unable to meet her daughter's gaze, while her father watched with grim satisfaction, believing survival justified this bargain. The vows were spoken in a monotone, the preacher's words sounding like judgment, not blessing. When Hargrove kissed her cheek, Martha's soul seemed to shrink back into herself, retreating somewhere he could not touch. That night in his dim cabin, she sat silently while he stoked the fire, his coughs echoing through the stillness. He did not reach for her with passion, but with a kind of awkward hesitation, as though he too knew this union was born not of love but of survival. Martha lay awake, tears wetting her pillow, whispering silent prayers that God might change her fate. Days turned into weeks, and while the cow gave milk that kept her family alive, Martha's spirit wilted like a flower in winter. She worked Hargrove's small homestead, cooking, tending the garden, hauling water, and moving through life like a ghost wearing a young girl's face. Townsfolk looked at her with pity, but no one dared intervene. And yet beneath the silence, change was stirring. For even in the harshest soil, seeds of defiance and hope can take root, and what Martha did next would shock everyone who thought her future had been decided. The weeks of quiet, servitude began to show Martha something unexpected. Old man Hargrove was not the monster she had imagined. He was tired, broken by life, and far lonelier than she had ever guessed. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried regret, as though he too mourned the way their marriage had been bought and sold like cattle. One evening, Martha noticed him sitting by the fire with a Bible open, his lips moving over words of forgiveness and mercy, his eyes wet. For the first time, she saw not just an old man but a human soul burdened by mistakes, longing for peace. And slowly, compassion began to take root where resentment once lived. Hargrove, sensing her kindness, softened as well. He no longer barked orders but asked gently, "Would you like to rest?" He built her a rocking chair with his own weathered hands, a gift that startled Martha with its thoughtfulness. For months they lived quietly, sharing meals, working side by side in the fields, and though their marriage was far from love in the romantic sense, it began to take a shape neither expected, a bond of mutual survival, respect, and even care. Then came the illness. One bitter winter morning, Hargrove collapsed in the barn, his breath shallow, his skin pale. Martha rushed to his side, fear tightening her chest. The doctor from town shook his head, whispering that age and sickness were catching up too fast. In those final days, Martha tended him tirelessly, wiping his brow, feeding him broth, sitting by his side as he whispered stories of his youth, of dreams he once had but never fulfilled. With a trembling hand, he told her, "You were my last chance at redemption, child. I never meant to chain you. I only wanted to leave this world less lonely. When he passed, Martha wept, not for the old stranger she had once dreaded, but for the man who had shown her unexpected gentleness in the twilight of his life. His will left her everything: the land, the cabin, the livestock. For the first time, Martha was not a pawn in her family's desperation, but a woman with her own future. She walked back into town not as the girl who had been sold for a cow, but as a widow with strength, independence, and land to her name. The townsfolk, once pitying, now looked at her with awe. Her family, ashamed, tried to approach her for support, but Martha stood firm, declaring that no one would decide her fate again. With determination burning in her heart, she rebuilt her life, turning the farm into a thriving homestead. And as she worked the soil, she remembered Hargrove's final words that, sometimes suffering, birth strength no one can steal. Her story became a quiet legend whispered across the plains. The girl who was sold for a cow yet rose stronger than anyone imagined, carrying both sorrow and triumph in her heart.